Nick
Well,
and Cory, I'm going to start this off as I usually do with a recitation that tries to put this in historical perspective. And by that, I mean zillions of years. So we started off as hunter-gatherers, which we did for several million years. We were in the agricultural age, the settlement age. We've been there for several 100,000 years. And then a couple of centuries ago, so we've gone from millions of years to hundreds, thousands, now to hundreds of years, centuries into the industrial age. Decades ago, 10 years gone by, we started the information age, and we are just emerging now into what I think Nick has named the cognitive augmentation. Like we've always had tools that we've used. This is a Stone Age cutting tool, but it's taken a human being to manipulate the tool and make it active from passive. And now we have these machines that are generating their own ideas as to solutions to problems and as to answers to our queries as well. So Nick says there's a brand new Chat GPT out there. We better get on it and give it a test. The fellow I follow here in terms of will this continue is Ray Kurzweil. He's done this price performance of computation since 1939, which was World War II, and that was the English breaking the German code, which theoretically was a critical part of winning World War II. You'll see that number is now up to 100 billion computations per second per dollar. And it's going to 1 trillion. He says that line has been going up ever since I started to look at this stuff 60 years ago, and it's not likely to stop. So the trajectory we're on now with this cognitive augmentation is going to keep going and get deeper and deeper and more complex. And I think you were the one, Nick, that said some of these tools that we have out there are improving 100% every 3.5 months. 100%, which is something like 30,000 times over the next 5 years, right? Unbelievable pace of change. We've never had it before. So I termed it an extinction event. If you as a business person or as a board of directors don't get onto this, don't begin to understand it, you are gone. And I think, Nick, your Google CEO estimated that something like half the companies in the S&P 500 were going to depart in the next decade. They just weren't going to keep up. So that, to me, for a board of directors, if you're not getting involved in this now, there's only one question left to answer, and that's where do you want to be buried? Because that is what's going to happen to you. So Cory is one of the guys who helps people avoid that kind of endpoint. Transforming data into action is the motto. AltaML is his company, and he's going to talk to us for the next half hour. But first, I want to introduce my podcast partner, our seventh adventure, Nick. And there you are in front of Google headquarters, formerly the chief evangelist. And I will happily turn this now over to Nick Darvo-Garno. Nick.
But thanks, David. Hi, everybody. Hey, Cory, how's it going? Good to see you. Yeah, whenever I hear that speech from you, David, by the way, I get the chills, like the extinction event. Where do you want to be buried? It seems so provocative, but I agree with that. I think when the pace of change is this fast, we have to get going. And by the way, Canada is, for those of you who are Canadian, is significantly behind the US and the UK and China. But today we're going to fix that because we've got Cory Janssen with us, and Cory has an extraordinary background. He started a number of companies. For those of you who are, in the financial world, he's co-founded Investopedia, which was, I mean, even in 1999, I was using this website. It was my go-to for financial analysis, and I grew it really quickly and sold it to Forbes. So an amazing success. He founded a number of other companies after that, including Galt Capital and Genalta Interactive. And his latest venture is AltaML, which is one of Canada's most important machine learning AI companies. They do a number of things, but they have a machine learning venture studio helping founders and entrepreneurs build their own machine learning companies. He builds machine learning software with his amazing team, and he also does some machine learning consulting to help companies get moving more quickly. And so we're super psyched to have you, Cory, and you're going to tell us how to use ML to do practical things in the business world to have immediate impact. So Cory, the floor is yours, and we're thrilled to have you.
Yep. Thanks, Cory.
Thank you so much, Nick. You are going to get 3 things from this presentation. Number one, I'm going to share some of the lessons that we've learned from working with enterprises across many different industries, distilling down a few of the high-level points that every executive should understand. I'm going to then switch over a little bit to the capital allocation side and give a little bit of a contrarian perspective in how we deploy our capital and how maybe you should think about the market. And then I'm going to close things up with some real life examples. We talk about AltaML as being a blue collar AI company. We all know about autonomous driving and these use cases that you see in the media, but by showing some use cases that might be a little bit more nuanced in terms of traditional industry, I hope that there's some inspiration you could take for your organization. Before we jump into things, I'll give a little bit of background in terms of who I am and why you should pay attention for the next 25 minutes or so. So AltaML was founded off of a failed project. Frankly, we were a mistake. Back around 2015, I embarked on a project to automate some other angel investments we've been making in the digital media space. So in 2015, we had a project around algorithmic content generation at the U of A. So keep in mind, I said 2015. Generative AI wasn't even a term, never mind a buzzword back then. So we were 4 years early in terms of where the tech was. And when I was talking with Nick beforehand, I sort of joked, OpenAI has sort of proven that our project plan might have been about $500 million light. But what I discovered, and this gentleman here on the right, for those of you who are in the AI space, you might recognize Dr. Richard Sutton. So he's not involved with AltaML, but we have the picture here up because the reason that we actually have an opportunity to build in Canada is because of some of the amazing academics. You might know Dr. Jeffrey Hinton at the U of T, who is widely known with Yoshia Bengio and Yann LeCun as the godfathers of deep learning. Well, Dr. Sutton literally wrote the book on another branch called reinforcement learning. And so because we had this cluster of professors at the U of A, even though the tech ecosystem in Edmonton is, let's call it emerging, it's probably one of the highest densities of machine learning engineers and data scientists. So AltaML is a builder and investor of AI software. What you're getting in this presentation here is a result of working with, we're over 100 team members, so we're probably one of the largest independent builders in the country, have seen over 400 different use cases with nearly 100 clients now to date, and launched 7 ventures as well out of our venture studio. Offices Edmonton, Calgary, Toronto, and Waterloo. So I'm hoping that some of the experiences that we've had over the last 6 years, and it has been 6 years. We were started in 2018. So while everybody is jumping on bandwagon now today, we think that the lessons that we've learned the hard way, hopefully you can take to your organization and have a little bit of an easier go. Okay. Let's get into lessons from the trenches. And I'm going to boil these down into 3 big lessons that we've seen across, again, hundreds of different projects. First off, most organizations create these job descriptions around unicorn data scientists. They want, first of all, they want you to have your master's or PhD in AI or a form of machine learning. And I've literally seen a job description with this exact same thing. Like, it'd be great if you had an MBA as well, maybe some project management skills, right? And while we're at it, like, just also maybe you can throw in some UX and some design side of things. This person just doesn't exist. Frankly, and over the last few years, someone with 10 years experience in machine learning probably was doing so in academia and probably is at Google or Microsoft or one of the hyperscalers. This stuff is still so new that, in fact, that the solution to this and the way organizations and executives should think about machine learning projects is trying to create multifaceted teams that can together solve those problems. It isn't just about the geeks. Yes, you absolutely need the machine learning specialists, the data scientists, but you also need the software engineers. You need the product managers. And what most miss out on is the subject matter, that those domain experts, the SMEs. It's extremely common for even the largest organizations to start an AI program and put it off into the IT department. It's simply not fair to the CTO. At the end of the day, AI is very much still in the early innings and very much R&D in nature. Unless you actually bring those subject matter experts to the table, not only will a project probably not get off the ground, but the adoption in our experience is almost always poor. Number two, not starting with a business problem. Those of you who are more technical might recognize this XKCD comic. I won't read this for you, but essentially not totally untrue that like, hey, how do you do ML? Well, you just start with a bunch of calculus, linear algebra, and just kind of stir it around until you get some answers, right? And the joke in this comic here, well, what if the answer's wrong? Just keep on stirring until you start finding something that's right. Even still today, we see this all the time. Said, well, what project should we start off with as organizations are taking on the first few use cases? And they go, well, we got a bunch of data over here, so why don't we actually just start working with it? Now, one thing that is always true is the data is always crap. No organization has ever come to us and say, like, you know what, our data is so pristine, really, like we're so thrilled with this, we can take on any one of these use cases. So we've seen that pointing towards the data set, but then it just doesn't work because there isn't ROI. This might sound like mom and apple pie, but you got to start with your business strategy. Do not do AI for AI's sake. Frankly, talk about just not even it's a little bit ironic. Like, we're an AI company that almost wants to ban using the term. Rather, if we think about our strategy and how we execute on that strategy and where we might have data, it just so happens that we've got this new tool in the toolbox. Where we had a screwdriver beforehand, we now have a power drill. So if we start with the strategy and then we bring in the IT, the technical side, but you have to have that literacy and the support from the top, from the ELT and even the board. That, to us, that education, that overall data literacy, and really starting with what's important, is what so many organizations miss. Third, no moonshot projects. We've got our crazy, glass mirror, freaky dog moonshot project in this GIF. I've heard so many CEOs start off with the biggest, hairiest problem that they could possibly take on when they've barely had their first project under their belt. What we've seen, and this might be more important than any other factor in the success, other than that, that buy in the education, it's small bets. We would rather have, for example, 10 $50,000 projects than one single $500,000 project. Because the fact of the matter is, you jump in and you start working on an AI ML project, you pop the hood, like I said, the data, it always sucks. And then so you start working, and more often than not, there's actually a business process change that needs to happen to collect more data to actually get to the point where you see a return on investment. Lots of enterprises talk about doing agile, but it's tough in a large organization. Structuring projects in this way, and frankly, this is also a procurement issue, right? Because we're used to procuring based on a project basis. So you have a perfect project plan, but AI is not mature enough to necessarily know exactly where you're going to get that ROI. Having the iterative approach with a number of projects and going through, and then being able to kill projects, experiment, and be able to put projects on the shelf while you change business processes, and work in this more kind of iterative cycle with many loops, is absolutely critical to getting results. Because the dirty secret in the industry is that a small fraction of projects ever get into production. Some numbers are as low as 15 to 25%. We would argue that that experience, I think, when we've talked to our clients, has borne out true. So of these billions of dollars being invested, the majority is just going down the drain. If you're not getting solutions into production, it's just a science experiment. Okay, so that's the three biggest things we've learned from working with many of our enterprise clients. Let's switch gears now here into the capital allocation side of things. I want to first talk about some terminology. You may have heard the term AGI, or artificial general intelligence. So artificial general intelligence is referring to when a computer is as smart as a human. And it's even a step down from that super intelligence. Think of it as better than everything that a human can do. OpenAI and many firms are pursuing AGI. And as it's discovered, when it's discovered, will likely be the biggest scientific breakthrough in human history. So I do believe it'll happen one day, but it's not here as of yet. Today, most of what you see in terms of machine learning is AI that will solve one specific problem. So a data scientist would call this narrow AI. Unless you are Satya Nadella, or unless you have $1 billion budget, you should not try to be taking on AGI. Because VCs, and we see like, are jumping into this space in a big, big way. And it seems like, frankly, that AI is the best capitalized sector anywhere. Last year, these numbers are getting a bit dated now, but the most accurate for 23, roughly $24 billion was invested across 400 deals. Behind the scenes, actually, only 7 deals absorbed over 80% of the capital. Again, these numbers are a little bit out because they're as of last year, but the point is completely correct that most of the money is going to a very small number of firms that are trying to take on and build these foundational model companies. Here's another look at the data. So generative. So when we talk about generative AI infrastructure and these horizontal platforms are taking up the vast majority of the dollars going into the space. There is a bit of a dirty secret here as well. When those deals are announced, like the rumor was for OpenAI that up to 80% of that funding was actually in credits that came back to Microsoft. And the same with Anthropic and AWS. So in essence, you can think of these deals as almost the greatest vendor financing deals in history. And I think Satya Nadella is an absolute genius. And one stroke with investing in OpenAI, he caught up on the IP in terms of where his competitors have gone, and then also created the biggest customer for Azure. The bottom line here, if you're listening to this, and again, unless you have $1 billion budget, I think chasing AGI and chasing horizontal platforms, these foundational models, is a market that really has winner-take-all dynamics. Picking the right horse there, for myself, I would argue, is next to impossible. Instead, we think the next generation of opportunities are in the application layer. So the chart that you see here right now, and this is by not a complete chart, but it was just simplified for you to a good mental model for a layperson. You know, at the bottom, you've got the chips, the hardware side, which NVIDIA is absolutely destroying everybody. There's many, many other players, of course. Then you've got the hyperscalers, so Amazon, Google, and Microsoft. They're building these platforms that now really they want to be utilities. They want to sell you compute and storage. We would argue that LLMs are really part of that horizontal infrastructure. Because we're Canadian here, we're going to throw on Cohere, and as a Canadian, I'm cheering for these guys, and hopefully that they're our champion in the game. But you've got OpenAI, Anthropic, and now xAI is getting into the game. There's a dozen other LLMs that could go on the list, from Mistral and a whole bunch of different names.
And Cory, like I know you said picking the winners would be hard, but if you had to today, pick the winner take all large language model winner, who would you put your money on?
I think OpenAI has so much capital and such backing with Microsoft. When you talk about building $100 billion cluster, which is the rumor that's coming out, you'd think that combo between OpenAI and Microsoft is pretty tough to beat. But never count out Google. Hey, I don't know. People who bet against Elon Musk usually lose. And so even though he's not even on this chart here, xAI, I mean, he raised $6 billion basically on a pitch deck, right? So for an entrepreneur in the space who spends a whole lot more time raising a tiny, tiny fraction of that, Elon is at a different level. So as we've worked our way up here, think of them now, and I think there's some parallels here with the dot-com boom going back to the 90s. Remember when it was Cisco and Lucent and Nortel and all these hardware makers, and that's where all the capital went to at first. But in the long range, the value actually accrued to the applications on top. We don't even really think of the infrastructure of the internet anymore. We would argue that there will be hundreds, thousands of companies in vertical applications that, yes, make use of Gen AI and LLMs, but have deep understanding of the workflows and unique edges on data specific within those markets. My favorite one over the long run is health. We do a whole lot right now in energy and clean tech. but virtually every industry, we would argue, will have its own players that maybe sometimes driven by incumbents, sometimes by startups, but all focused on solving very specific problems in that industry. And, part of this, again, here is the competition, which I've already touched on, and the platforms are built. I would say that the deep tech, building LLMs is really, really hard. Again, being Canadian-centric here, there's one amazing investor in Canada, Radical Ventures. They would probably be the only firm in the country with enough capital to really be making bets in this space, right? So as you're looking at this, as you're looking from a board perspective or as an executive, just because you see these massive bets in the market doesn't mean there isn't opportunities for you to be able to actually look at what's happening closer to home in your specific space. Okay, so we've talked about some of these operational issues and opportunity, these operational issues that we've encountered across hundreds of projects. Talked about where we think capital allocation fits in. We're going to close off here before we get into discussion around some use cases that we've worked on to help maybe demonstrate and give some inspiration beyond the backflipping robot that you see jumping here, which this Boston Dynamics, you might have seen this on social media, is definitely cool. But you'll notice a thread here that in real life, ML is like a little bit more boring. We worked on a project with the government of Alberta to predict wildfires. Now, if you live anywhere in Western Canada, I don't need to tell you the importance of this, as we've lost half our summer from smoke. So previously, wildfire duty officers would actually be working in Excel and trying to allocate equipment around the province, frankly, on paper and in Excel. We built a model from data sets they had to try to predict where in a region a fire would occur, so that we could actually allocate and put, it's actually a resource utilization problem. Move the equipment for pre-suppression to the right areas. So we believe that this over time will result in less fires as you can catch it. And, it's tougher to measure in the short run. But from a return on investment perspective, this right off the bat, I think can save $2 to $5 million per year on overtime and that crews being allocated to the right areas. We would have never understood this opportunity unless we sat down and worked with those duty officers and understood their workflows. Once we understood that workflow, it actually wasn't too difficult to say, if we bring around these data, could we actually improve on that model? Because so much of it is gut. And in this case, we're not replacing that human. We're giving a tool for them to make better decisions. Next use case is from insurance, actually workers' comp insurance. So we worked with a workers' compensation insurance company on approving claims without human intervention. So again, this is not actually denying claims or working or trying to get, because there's actually some issues around bias and regulation that will come in the financial sector in a big way. When a claim comes in, we built a solution, which what we've done is trying to predict, what's the likelihood that claim will be approved? And after a certain threshold, we just approve it without ever having to see a human. This is significant because their workflows actually then, by getting rid of the easy cases, the claims officers can actually work on the more difficult ones. Workers' comp, many industries, the workers' comp organizations are not their most favorite organizations to work with, right? Especially when in construction and energy, right? But I can tell you internally, they care deeply about workers that are hurt and really want to get them back to work as quickly as possible. And so this use case actually allows resources to be freed up to do just that. But on top of it, it saved thousands and thousands of hours per year as well. Here's an example of safety. So I know it's a little bit small here on the screen, but you can see on this chart, we're in an industrial facility, a midstream gas facility, and there was a near miss. So by that, basically there was some fireproofing, some kind of cladding, which there's some corrosion on it or something like this, and it fell off and almost injured a worker. So when this happens, you basically have to do these kind of site turnarounds and do some inspection to make sure that workers are going to be safe. We took video from an engineering firm that had the whole plant mapped out and used a computer vision model to try to predict where there might be spots where there might be similar safety incidents. In doing this, of course, the goal is to keep workers safer. But there was also a 7-figure return in terms of annual savings from that overall turnaround. The screenshot you see is actually the application and how we build it. So again, it's this tool that is helping that safety professional better isolate out and better know where to actually look for something in real life. And I am from Alberta. And so as you can imagine, we've got a lot of energy, oil and gas related use cases. The energy industry, I would argue to our good friends in Ontario and otherwise, is actually the biggest investor in renewables and probably the organizations that care the most about climate change and reducing carbon. Here's a really esoteric example of how that is done. So what you're seeing here is actually a screenshot of a dashboard for a rig. So actually a drilling rig. And this use case actually tries to predict when we can turn off various generators that are being used for that rig. So imagine a rig is and this is actually in production in West Texas right now currently. So you can imagine you're burning a ton of diesel every single day for operations of that rig. The rig operator really cares about performance and isn't always focused on how much energy is being produced or what they're using as that inputs. By building this tool to actually give some better indication of when you can turn off generators, we believe that tens of thousands of gallons of diesel can be saved over the course of the year. So our estimates of here, again, it was like we think as this goes into production across the fleet that it's probably a $3 to $6 million US sort of return. But as importantly, the amount of CO2 that would not go into the atmosphere is massive for this use case as well. In our experience, there aren't too many use cases that are just on carbon, but we'd love for that to be the case down the road.
Yeah, Nick's got one with all of the Google Cloud computing centers, right? Where you were worried about water and temperature, and you now have a completely data-driven system, don't you? Is that right, Nick?
Yeah, Google is one of the world's biggest user of electricity, and 5-6 years ago, it used a machine learning algorithm in its data centers to cool the computers, as opposed to having a bunch of humans turn on and turn off valves. And just with this one model, it was able to reduce the electricity usage in its data centers by 40%, which was a massive
DeepMind use. It was tied with DeepMind, I believe, right? I think
it
was a really
it was. Yeah.
We won't hit any of the climate change goals without using software to automate industrial processes. And again, we might not be able to beat Google at its own game in data centers, but where Silicon Valley doesn't go to energy utilities, some of the more traditional industries, we believe that we can have an edge.
Yeah.
So we went through 3 that we've worked with our enterprise clients. Here's 3 of our investments. Alpha Layer uses AI to help optimize portfolios for institutional asset management. This company came out of a project, a joint venture that we had with AIMCO, the $160 billion pension fund in Alberta. So we worked alongside their team for a number of years, literally dozens of use cases, put 15 or so into production, and then identified where there was a potential to have a tool set that would be able to be broadly commercialized. So AltaML, my firm, then led the seed round, and we've taken this out. Think of this as basically providing the back end tools to help investors, to help an institutional, specifically for a hedge fund or a small pension fund, to be able to actually make better decisions or drive different portfolio strategies.
Right. Yeah, that's amazing. Just before I go on, Abu Dhabi Investment Holding Company has a new corporate director. It's an AI program who sits at the board table.
Well,
and praises all the investments that are coming to the directors.
Well, I'll be in the UAE in the next couple of months, and they're going to invest $100 billion in AI. So maybe I can get sidetracked with that AI there. I'd like a little bit of that cash as well, to be honest.
Okay, well, we'll see if we can get you onto that then. All right.
Legal tech. Here's another example. So you think, well, lawyers is probably one of the slowest areas for transition, and that's true. But in this case, so we've funded a company that is building tools to optimize the research process for litigators. So we actually purchased the largest independent corpus of Canadian case law. Believe it or not, case law in Canada is technically not public domain to be able to train AI models on. There's a couple large firms that sort of dominate the market. So we started building out some initial IP saying, could we actually chat with a case? Could we understand case law? So in this situation, we're using large language models, but infusing it with what we know is true. There was the use case in New York where if as a lawyer, you just go to ChatGPT, This whole thing with hallucinations, in other words, LLMs lying, well, it's a big issue because if you're submitting stuff to a judge like this lawyer did in New York that is just fabricated, well, you have this tendency to get disbarred. We believe that this market is perhaps the best usage of LLMs, or one of the best usage, and it'll completely change legal. Here's another LLM example, another company we recently backed, an amazing founder who had multiple exits in the ag space. Every time you drive by in, say, a rural setting and you see those John Deere dealerships, farm equipment, you can imagine there's a massive amount of CapEx invested there, both in terms of the initial sale and the service. So we've been getting the operational menus or the operational guides, as well as information, building a deep data set in that space to be able to actually have a better tool for farmers to be able to make decisions, both again for service and new purchases. So this company is coming out of stealth mode right now, and we're in the process of raising for supporting its raise for its seed round, seed to Series A. And this is just a really high level. I gave you three examples that we did from enterprise clients, 3 investments we've made. Here's just our current list of various opportunities we're looking at. It's everything from detecting fraud in casinos to a ton of examples within the health space, to analytics for the fashion industry, to using AI to actually improve our internal due diligence process. The number of opportunities out there that are in the vertical space are endless. And so this is why we see over the long run, we think that the market's going to move up the chain from horizontal into vertical. Lastly, here with David on giving it, David as Mr. ICD, I can't end this without talking about the importance of board governance and what directors need to know. I think there's already been some efforts with ICD and other organizations to really up that level. We believe that directors being able to understand enough and ask the right questions is absolutely critical. And frankly, we have a list of what we think is the top questions that directors need to be able to ask. If you ping me on LinkedIn or just send me a note, and you'll see my contact in the next slide, I'm happy to send that information to you. But I want to highlight one area, and that's around responsible AI. So if you build models with bias, that bias will be amplified through an AI model. You can't just build AI and then have some responsible governance layer on top. It's like the cake is baked. You can't put on some RAI icing. I'll give you an example here. We were working on one use case with a government use case where it was about benefits being granted to certain citizens. And the way the data was stored, sex was, or gender rather, was stored as a binary, male, female. We actually had a non-binary team member working on this who said, I can't be stored in this data set. And I love that example because it really demonstrates, unless we collect the data and work with it and have this lens the whole way through the process, there will be big problems. I will bet my life that in the next few years, you're going to see massive lawsuits from banks and the financial sector where we're starting to use AI models that will be discriminatory against certain groups. It is absolutely critical as these tools are deployed that boards and management can ask the right questions to make sure that we understand and that we're complying with regulation, really doing the right thing morally. Because AI is like any other tool. It's a double-edged sword. If we do it the right way, it's going to augment human potential and improve so many things. But if you do it the wrong way, again, happy to kind of share some more specifics there. We could do a whole presentation on this topic, to be honest, but just ping me and happy to share what we've got. So to wrap up here, we've covered these operational side, the capital allocation side, and a few examples. Here are the 3 messages I really hope that you took out of this presentation. For one, just forget about the term AI. Think of this as improving business processes through data. That's less sexy, I know, and gets me in trouble when I'm fundraising, but it also makes it AI more approachable so that once you get rid of that fear, you can actually engage your team and actually use it for that tool that augments human potential. Second, we're contrarian a little bit here. Like all the buzzes around the horizontal and these foundational models, and those are absolutely key, but I want an area where I can make money. I see the opportunity and where we're putting our capital is in the application layer, those vertical applications where we build an edge on data because we understand an industry better than anybody else. And third, the best use cases are actually pretty boring. At the end of the day, all AI is, if we think of this as just improving a business process through data, you're either reducing costs, you're reducing risk, or you're creating new opportunities. So yes, the media is going to bandy about these big examples. You're going to see all that type of stuff. Within your organization, within your industry, I guarantee you there's dozens of use cases that you could take on. It's just about elevating that AI literacy and approaching projects in that right way. And then I think you can be one of those ones where, maybe it's not an existential crisis, as David alludes to. I mean, it is, but at least that'll be your competition. You'll be that much further ahead of them. And with that, hopefully there's some questions or some discussion. I really thank everybody for attending. And like I said, feel free to ping me if I can ever be of any assistance. That's my direct cell. Feel free to hit me up on WhatsApp or send me anything directly. Anybody that's contacting here, I don't hand it off. Feel free to reach out if I might be of help.
Hey, Cory, that was amazing. Some questions coming into the chat. Please, everybody, feel free to ask some more, and I've got some questions myself. We'll start with a question from Christy Jacobs. You describe how you work behind the scenes with the subject matter experts on the client side to create impactful solutions, and how you integrate with existing enterprise systems and get governance/approval. How do you do your work day to day?
So is it like how we're working directly with day-to-day clients, or the mechanism from that exactly? I'm just wanting to make sure I understand the question precisely.
Yeah, I mean, if David hires you as a consultant for his company, like, what are you going to do to make this work by working with the subject? So say you work with a mining company, you get the mining engineers to work with you. Like, how do you actually work with the engineers? How do you integrate with their systems that are there? Like, what does a day-to-day look like to make things work?
Right. So the way we engage is the engagement model is a little bit different, because if you go project by project, first of all, we haven't had success, right? And there's so much overhead in creating and building those initial relationships with teams. We would argue that having multiple streams of work so that you can move in this agile fashion is absolutely critical to joint success. So we'll have one stream of work that's all about ideation, being able to talk with various groups in terms of getting use cases and prioritizing against each other, each one of those use cases. A stream of work for experimentation. And again, think of these as $50,000 to $100,000 bets where we're prototyping out and saying, do we think there's enough there? And then a final stream of work where we're putting models into operation. By having these overall this programmatic approach, it allows us to have a deeper relationship where, because there's going to be multiple subject matter experts at the table. As we can work with the initial teams and being able to go across an organization, you can bring those in a way that is much more fluid versus, again, starting with that one project, going down this one road and realizing halfway through the project plan that you don't have enough data, or you're not going to be able to actually get any ROI. You're not going to be able to get technical accuracy up to the point that makes a difference.
Yeah, and you mentioned in your presentation that in your experience, only about 15% of projects get into production. Now, can you tell us why that is and how to avoid that problem?
Well, I touched on a few things. There's sticking into the IT department is a common one, right? I mean, there's many great CTOs out there. Often the best CTOs are risk mitigators, right? And as you see, the number of organizations in Canada that even have chief data officers is actually pretty low. So when you think about having this in the right area where you can actually get closer to the business stakeholders, clearly it needs to be a collaboration with IT, and there needs to be some things that are centralized. But the real question is has that tech group taken on R&D related projects or projects with higher technical risk? I mean, acknowledging that this is different than, say, an ERP implementation is a critical first step. And so I'd say getting that's part of it. I'd say picking the wrong use cases. The board chair saw in some other organizations that they did this, or read some article about what Google was doing, and then you try to take on that moonshot project. that would be another very common one. So, you know, the mistakes I've seen, they're definitely kind of tied towards that.
Yeah, and how do you and I agree with that completely, by the way. So if you have a list of, smaller use cases, right? So you get 25 ideas for $50,000 bets, right? How do you typically tend to prioritize those and pick ones that are most likely to be successful?
Right. And frankly, this is um, when we're starting off an engagement with a new client, it's often along this way where we're getting those use cases on the board and really looking at them in terms of where's the impact. It's trying to find the Goldilocks use case. What's big enough to get the ROI so it actually moves the needle? Because like if this eliminates 1 or 2 FTEs, why bother, right? You know, and not that there's anything magic about $1 million, but we kind of go, hey, unless it's a 7-figure project, are you really going to justify it by like, let's make sure there's enough meat on the bone so that you have line of sight to ROI. And then is there enough data? So you've almost got your initial axis of ROI, is there data? And then you layer in technical complexity and the adoption issues. More and more of that adoption and the regulatory issues become filters. And so we'll work in, we call it the catalog of opportunities. We'll work with organizations to be able to stack them up and get those use cases and really try to find that Goldilocks use case, that low-hanging fruit. Because once you prove on a couple use cases, and then you don't need every use case to work, but as long as the portfolio of use cases has positive ROI, then that allows organizations to actually lean in and put more resources behind their AI strategy.
Right.
Yeah.
There's a question by Frank, which is a really important question. So as you're doing all that work, right, on these use cases, how can the board make sure that this is done responsibly? What are the governance guardrails that should be in place? And then at what point in different projects should the board, there be milestones where the board, should pay closer attention to? Like, how does the board really stay on top of this stuff?
Yeah, well, hey, David, I would be, because I know ICD, because my partner Nicole actually was involved in both the Council of Canadian Innovators and ICD in terms of doing some of the presentation. I'd be curious in your take, David, and how ICD, because I know there's a whole module on this, I believe, right? I have an answer, but before I get to it, I'd be curious in your thought.
No, it's building at the moment. So I think we need your thoughts to build further.
Yeah, no, it's funny. I'm teaching the class, the ICD class on
You are,
AI.
hey?
Yeah. So
Yeah. So like I said,
So
and Frank, feel free to ping me afterwards, and I've got some I think number one is knowing the right question. It's number one is education. Does the board first of all even understand the basics of what use case, what is AI versus ML versus deep learning? There's this alphabet soup of terms out there. Like clearly you're not going to be building AI and board members aren't going to be getting their hands dirty here, but understanding the type of problems that can be solved, understanding the type of pros and cons of these various technologies. And then as you have that education, being able to understand the right questions to ask. So for example, if I'm a bank or PII or personal identifiable information is going to be a much larger issue than say a use case around industrial process control.
Mm-hmm.
And so understanding the right questions of, okay, what are we doing to make sure that we're not tying to, and we do a lot in the healthcare space as well. Everybody's absolutely completely freaked about their healthcare information being sold off. Are we selling off the data? Because no organization in most cases, and especially with our system in Canada, it shouldn't be sold off. And there's some really bad cases in the UK here of what happened along those lines. But building applications, so long as we do so, that don't necessarily tie to an individual, the aggregate data, right, or the anonymized data, what steps have we taken? Have we taken on the right certifications? Have we done these right checks? Have we engaged, or do we have sort of that safety and governance, and so without, I could probably do an entire presentation on this. And so happy to kind of follow up with some details we have behind the scenes. We consult with boards on this all the time, and we'll go in and it's a much longer conversation, but it really is, I think at the start, that education piece and arming the board with the right questions to ask based on your industry.
yeah, and I would add, based on the ICD class, with Cory, I think Cory's right. I would add a couple of things, which is if you're going to start doing AI, you need to have some AI policies in place. right?
time.
And are employees allowed to use ChatGPT inside the company? Things like that, right? Because by the way, if you put something into ChatGPT, it is now, public, right? And 11% of what employees put into ChatGPT is confidential information. So just, so there's issues of policies, but then there's also issues of governance. And so if you're going to do any kind of AI use cases, especially if you do any business in California or Colorado or in Europe, where there are existing laws, where there are not in Canada yet, right? But if you can do some use cases in Europe, today you have to have governance in place, or else you can lose 7% of your company's revenues. Right? The fines are that severe. So I would.
And we could get into some big issues in Canada and how we've been so slow to actually regulate. The uncertainty is a major issue. So you're bang on, Nick.
Yeah, and then this isn't a plug for this person, but she is pretty extraordinary. My co-teacher in the ICD class, her name is Carol Piovesen, Piovesen. She gave one of the webinars that David and I do, and she's a world-class expert on governance of AI. It's an early topic. We don't know all the answers, but I guess what I would say, Frank, is I would hire somebody like Carol to advise your company on governance because she's done this 50, 60 times.
Yeah.
Okay, moving on to other.
Nick, I see one with Victor. Can I
want to go back to that because I say to the boards, do not be terrified by the potential risks. You can build these guardrails. There are people in the business today, and Carol is one of them with her company, INQ. Phone her up, tell her to get these guardrails in place, and then you can make the assumption that you are going to be operating inside a responsible arena and get started. I mean, Europe is basically busy writing directives. And I'm on the board of the European Directors Association called EcoDA. We spend 99.99% of all the staff help doing word checking on European directives. And one of the other directors was the head of Bang & Olufsen and number 2 in Lego. And he said, we're busy suffocating innovation when it hasn't even started. And so
that's exactly it.
The innovation. Just say, we can get somebody in here today who can provide us with responsible guardrails so we can get started. I get passionate about getting going.
Yeah,
Nick, you're a little more conservative than I am, right?
What Cory mentioned, that the ROI isn't quite there for AI yet, and I agree with that. But when something is doubling in power every 3.5, 4 months, right? The ROI is coming. It's coming fast.
The ROI is there if you do it in the right way. I'm just saying if you don't production is not. I'm just saying like something that's not being used by guarantee won't get any return.
Yeah.
So
the
just
ROI is
clarification.
The ROI is going to go up a lot. Hey, we got time for one more question, I think. So I'm going to have to pick. There's 3 or 4 other questions.
Nick, if I can tie this together, and Vitor has one about elaborating more on hallucinations, because I think it ties to your last comment there as well.
Yeah.
On using some of the publicly available services and understanding that when you give money to most of these services, it's like if you're giving internal engineering documents, for example, that is now known to those LLMs, right? And so if there's an education piece or a blocking internally that many organizations have done. But when we talk about minimizing hallucinations or minimizing the errors or the fact that LLMs right now, most of them don't know if they're lying. So the strategy for that is actually very easy and very clear. And as we're doing a ton of work in this area right now. There's a technique called RAG, and you don't need to know about this from a business perspective, but essentially think of it as you can use these LLMs in your own private cloud, pointed to your own databases. So with Jurisage, for example, the way that we know that we're not inventing case law is that the only thing that we can return is something that's actually for the database that we vetted. Think if you are ExxonMobil. Even though you might have a decent SOP and operating procedure, from one of these LLMs, your employees, if you're returning Chevron's SOP or Chevron safety document in your ExxonMobil, like it doesn't matter how accurate it is, you need to actually return what's from your internal database. And so the power for LLMs is absolutely massive. But when it's done in a safe and secure way where it's your own data and it doesn't go outside your network.
Yeah. We have time quickly for one more. So Christine is asking, have you done some work with AI on social enterprises, nonprofits?
A little bit. I mean, most social enterprises often don't have enough data and don't have the budget, to be frank. Like we try to do some pro bono work where we can here and there, but the big problem with most social enterprises is the lack of data. So for that matter, like we don't work with many SMEs. In the early days we would try, and there just isn't enough there. The fact of the matter is that the data sets exist in the enterprise. If there was the right social enterprise that had a purposeful project, we would love to consider it. Feel free to reach out. It is important with our team, and if we can do some of these projects as we've got extra capacity, we certainly look at them. It's just hard to get a large enough social enterprise that actually has a data set where you can make a difference.
Yeah, and like you've seen, this is a public case. You can actually just Google it. When I was at Google, we helped St. Jude's Children's Hospital, the largest children's hospital in the world, increase their funding by 46% in 1 year by using a whole bunch of AI marketing tricks. So, and that they raise $1 billion a year. So this was $460 million incremental money raised. So, yes, from a fundraising perspective, there's lots of cool stuff you can do. From a service delivery perspective, to Cory's point, depending on the data that you have, you can deliver your. I've worked with a couple of nonprofits who make decisions on who they give funding to exclusively using AI today. So yeah, you can do some stuff, but you certainly have to have good data. Well, Cory, I know we're at time. Wanted to thank you very, very much. That was super enlightening, super helpful, and really practical as well, like board level, but also day-to-day level. I think it's important for the board to understand these things. So thanks so much, and I'll kick it off to Quinn.
Yeah, thanks, Dick. And I will say, I know David, Christy, and there's probably others there that questions came both from the Q&A and the chat. So we were kind of trying to bounce back and forth there. Feel free to send me a note. And if we didn't get to your question, of course, happy to answer one-on-one afterwards. But thanks for having me. Hopefully there was something for everybody there, at least get a little bit of inspiration. And there's so much potential here. It's just leaning in the right way. So thanks very much for everybody's time, and look forward to continuing the conversations.